So, hi everybody. Hi Tasha.
Hello.
Good to see you. Just getting in the room here. Gonna make sure that we've got ourselves in. Everybody's here. La, 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 la. Oh, I'm just gonna mute. Sorry, dog was barking. Somebody at the door, but my husband's gonna deal with that. It's always good to have a husband around. Well, good to see you. Hi everybody. Say hi when you come in. Oh, that's great. Good. Yeah, people come in. That's great. Good. Oh, hi Kim. Good to see you. Well, what a treat we've got tonight. Oh yeah, people are all coming in now. It's great to see you all. So I hope you're all well, listening in. We've got the wonderful Tasha Attwood here, coming in to speak to us. And I've been really looking forward to this, Tasha, because there's a lot for us to talk about. And it's really good because we've known each other for a while, but we haven't really had a chance to connect before. So this is really great to be able to do that tonight. Oh, hi Ali, hi Gemma, hi Sylvie, great, good. Hi everybody. They're saying hi Tasha as well, so that's good. Right, so it's Disability Pride Month.
Yes.
We've been thinking about doing something together for a while, and I thought this is a good opportunity for us to look at that. So there's a lot that I want us to look at tonight and talk about, and but I want us to start off really with an opportunity for you to share a bit about your origin story, because I know you first and foremost as a really amazing professional, a really great trainer, and somebody who does a lot for the community. That's what I think about when I think about you. So let's start off with that then, Tasha. How did you come to working in the community? What's your origin story? You can go back as far back as you want.
Right. So I
began.
Well, I connected with dogs as a child. I know everybody says that, but I did because of my background wasn't very nice. So when we think of attachment theory, so like moving behavior, for me as a child, my attachment was with dogs, because for me as a child, dogs are safe, dogs are reliable, dogs are trustworthy. So I had a very different relationship with animals as a child than perhaps other people would. So I know there's like quite a lot of people that as young people started out doing agility and that kind of thing with their dogs or attending classes. And for me, it was a case of the dog is my family and taking the dog everywhere with me. So I was a little bit of the odd one out. So we lived in a village, and then did see this like youngster walking about with a dog off the lead, and we went everywhere together and was very well known. And then from that, adults started saying, can you walk my dog for me? Because if this child's walking a dog without a lead, they must be good at what they're doing. So then it went through like that I began dog walking. And then of course, with dog walking comes a little bit of training and that kind of thing. And then from there, sort of like I went to college and had a really destructive time as a young person. So when it should have been a good time, like going to university, doing that sort of thing, considering a gap year, my whole life fell apart. So I really struggled at that point, and then ended up in care as an older person, which doesn't normally happen. And then from there, like years of my life was just a complete mess. So then I had to get a normal job, because I was like paying the bills and that kind of thing, and finding my independence as a young person, like 19 years old. I had 3 jobs just to pay the bills, just to live in a house by myself without social services and that kind of thing. So I still worked with dogs like part-time. So I did my other 2 jobs and then worked with dogs. And then I found myself training dogs. And then whichever job that I had, I always found myself training dogs, coming back to studying. And then I ended up working in care for quite a few years. And through that, I was started to bring in therapy dogs and reaching out to rescue kennels and different things like that to help people with dementia. So in care homes, you're supposed to have a license for helping people with dementia or having them as residents, and we didn't. Our home was just awful. So I did all these things, and then through that, I then began to talk to therapy dog trainers and people at rescue kennels. And then it came to a point where our very, very bad care home was shut down. Finally, it was shut down. And there's an opportunity to go work at the kennels, like in the next town. So I got the job, and then from there I ended up working with rescue dogs, protection dogs. It was a bit of a puppy mill, and it was also boarding kennels. So to begin with, I was really excited to be working with like 70 dogs, like dream come true. And then as time went on, I started to realise that things weren't right. And then being a prong collar for the first time in my life, and an electric shock collar, and that the dogs weren't allowed to go out for walks, and it was kept in awful conditions. So there's all that story there with the kennels, and I decided that I wanted to prevent dogs going into rescue rather than just being a person that feeds them, waters them. And my boss literally kicked me out at 5 p.m. at night. So I'd want to do second rounds, because when you've gone in at 7 in the morning, you've fed and watered them and you've cleaned them. Well, to me, logically, by the evening, they're going to need a second feed and more water. They weren't having that, like, even as a voluntary basis. It was just ridiculous. So it came to the point where I was very, very mentally ill working there. And the GP said to me, like, if you don't leave, you're going to end up being sectioned because you are so mentally ill. And I'd lost so much weight that I was unrecognizable, and it was just really getting to me. So I decided then to move my self-employed business with dog training to go full time. So I was quickly trying to scramble, getting qualifications and then getting to know people in the industry. And I was met by not very nice people in the area who had been doing it for years, and it was all very traditional. So my training was more sort of relationship based about when we do classes, it's more about working for real life situations rather than if your dog can do sits and downs and that kind of thing. And it was literally like 2013, it's not that long ago, like 10 years ago. And this whole idea was very unwelcomed and people didn't like the idea of doing it. But the people who came to classes then decided to keep coming to classes, and they enjoyed that the training was different and it was more centered on both of them rather than we're going to walk around in a circle at a village hall and that kind of thing. So then I started doing more one-to-ones and that kind of thing. And then my qualifications kept taking off, and then joined the Pet Professional Guild, and then did the ICP and ended up with Into Dogs. So that's like my whole story condensed.
That story is because, and something to really celebrate, Tasha, because despite all those kind of barriers and blocks and challenges early on, you kind of navigated through that to find some self-determination actually about the things that, and do you think then, because obviously it was that kind of connection with dogs when you were younger, and you know, so many people I speak to, they really relate with that. That's sometimes with animals, it's the first experience you have of a safe connection, a safe social connection, actually. So when you actually started working with dogs in a more formal way, even though you were surrounded by outdated methods, a kind of, you know, kind of tools that are pretty barbaric, as we know, do you think it was that early experiences of your own, understanding the importance to seek safe connections,
I think
that kind of informed you to think this is wrong, actually, I need to do something different?
Yeah, well, it all came about because when I initially started there, the kennels was in such a abhorrent condition. Like, I won't describe because it may be upsetting for people, but it was something that you see on an RSPCA advert. So my main thing for like the first month was literally getting the kennels to a standard that it was okay for a dog to be in that area, because it absolutely wasn't okay when I first started. So my boss always took me on with a view to me becoming a trainer working for him. So he's like expanding his business, and he's gonna have a team of trainers. And when I was like cleaning, I saw things that weren't okay. So I saw dogs screaming and crying. And then this would be because he was using a prong collar or an electric shock collar. So when it got to the point where he wanted me to start training with him, and he said about I use these tools, I asked him to put an electric shock collar on my wrist, and it was on number 5, and it literally burnt a hole in my skin. So I know balance trainers will argue it, and they'll say that is a complete lie, but it's generally true, and I do have a scar on my wrist from it. And he sent off a dog to Hull, so that's like the next county up, and this dog came back in such a state, like I can't even describe it. He was like walking to the floor, absolutely petrified. His neck was a mess. He was self-defecating. And I'd never seen a dog in such an awful condition before. And this was all because the dog wasn't biting the sleeve. So basically, he was tortured by this other trainer. And because I had to clean the dogs out, I went into the kennel with the dog, thought the hatch was down. He broke through the hatch and he attacked me. and I was bitten quite badly, but I didn't see it as he's attacked me because it was personal. I saw it as you're a human being and I'm scared. So I automatically started doing a lot of rehabilitation with the dogs that I work with, because the way that they was cared for was just absolutely disgusting. And I think from that, and then seeing what was happening with the dogs that the boss had on the lead, I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not taking any part in that whatsoever. And that's another reason that my mental health came downhill, because as a relationship improves and you get to know each other, you get more comfortable with saying things to one another. And it got to a point where he literally threw a pong collar at me and said he couldn't train me anymore because I was training these dogs force free and getting better results. And I was like 24 at the time. So that was really scary for me, having that happen.
Wow, I think it makes you think about how many really empathetic people have just found their ways into the wrong kind of facility, who don't necessarily have access to a broader understanding, who find themselves stuck in that kind of scenario, but just being told this is the way we do it.
Yeah.
So again, it just shows again to me the strength of character for you to think, well, do you know what? I'm gonna move on, especially when you think about the part of your brain. I'm sure when we struggled with kind of insecure attachments, things like a workplace, you can feel I've got to stay here because this is where I have my worth.
Yeah.
As you know, we've got this thing about McDonald's on the news at the moment, and I was listening to one of the young girls who was under a lot of sexual harassment, actually, from the manager. She's in her mid-20s now, but she was 17, 18 at the time, she was saying. But she felt she couldn't tell anybody or couldn't leave because she was determined to kind of create a space within her work connection, because she didn't necessarily have it at home.
Yeah.
So these things are complicated, aren't they? They can be quite layered, I think.
Absolutely.
So, have you had any big influences during that time? A certain dog maybe who you thought, wow, you know, that dog taught you loads, or certain people within the industry? I know you said you found the ICP, so of course that would have been Lisa Tenzin-Dolma back in the day.
Yeah,
sure.
that's it.
And so did you come across something like the ICP by chance, or were you actually searching for, did you kind of think you kind of knew the kind of education you wanted and you were just actively trying to find it?
Yeah, so when I was searching for education in 2013, it was really difficult. So you was directed to like Groupon for dog training and that kind of stuff. And I was really struggling to find anyone like the ICP or Canine Principles. So I was constantly searching all of the time for an organization to join so that I could be assessed and kind of prove my worth, especially the problems I was having in the local area, because of being a young person and not feeling that I could leave the kennels, because who was going to look out for the dog then? So I had all of this pressure on myself as a young person, didn't have family to turn to. So that's kind of like how I find Canine Principles and ISDP. And I was like, I want to be the very best that I can be and get as qualified as possible to kind of prove that I can do this and then hopefully make a difference for other dogs. And at the kennels, I think every single dog was an inspiration there, because with the rescue, like my knowledge of rescues is you go into rescue, but you get out, you get home. All of 2 dogs was rehomed my entire year at that kennels, which I thought was disgusting. It all came down to money. So the more dogs that was in the rescue section, the more money that they was getting. I mean, some of these dogs were kept in the dark. There was no lighting, no electric. There's no comfy beds, there's no TV, no heated floors. It's the complete opposite of Dogs Trust. And there was one dog where he was going to be euthanized when I first arrived there. She was a husky German Shepherd mix called Polo. And she had patches of fur missing because she was so stressed and she was so sad. And apparently she bit the previous kennel hand. But what I found that the trend was lots of dogs were biting because of the previous kennel hand, because of the trauma, because when he went into their kennels, he was kicking them and he was pushing them and doing awful things to them. And these dogs held on to that. So of course, when another person comes in, they're like, well, not taking this from you, and they're standing the ground. So with Polo particularly, it took me 3 weeks of walking him backwards in a crouch position to fill a bowl, to put water in a bowl, to clear up her mess, and then let her come up behind me and sniff me, which was a big trust thing. So I was like, you can kill me at any point. And with doing that with her, our relationship was then that she just absolutely adored me and I could fuss her. But if the boss and his wife ever tried to go near her, she would try and attack because she'd associated them with trauma. And my thing was doing it for dogs like Polo and some of the other dogs at the kennels who also had very bad stories, because this wasn't a case of these dogs have been abused and they're coming to rescue. These dogs went to the pound, so we don't know the history. Then the rescue will go and pick up the dogs that he thought he would get a lot of cash for because people feel sorry for them when they see them on a website. And then they get put into these kennels when they've got no hope of ever being rehomed.
It's tough, and you know what, Tasha, I'd like to say that kind of things in the past, but I know of a couple of operations in the UK. One of them's under investigation, the other one hopefully will be, but you know, these things can still go on a little bit. And
Yeah.
And just on a bigger point there, you know, I hear a lot of aversive people who deal with kind of serious cases who kind of argue about the fact that the tools and it's just a matter of opinion and all this kind of thing. But one thing I know that they will never experience that you and I have is a dog who will give themselves that trust and safety to you.
Exactly.
Willingly. Because you know, they can totally get dogs to do or not do stuff. That's fair enough. They can have that argument. But when that dog who has had all that trauma, that dog who has been potentially labeled as dangerous, says, you know, we're okay, they'll never experience that, because you can't ever experience that unless the dog has that choice over being able to do that willingly, you know, and it's a powerful thing.
Absolutely.
So that was an extra stress for you then, wasn't it? I think, you know, as you say, I think when you came to think, I can't do this anymore, I need to leave, and I need to make my own Tasha mark on things. It is leaving that behind, isn't it? I think it's just recognizing that sadly the fate for those dogs has been kind of sealed, sadly. But this is why it's important to have the kind of outlook that you have, because there are loads of more dogs out there that you can actually have a real influence on from the beginning. And of course, that's what you've done. So brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing it with us. I think it's what a powerful story. And I think, and it's one I didn't know, Tasha. And so even more kudos to you for what you do know and how you've converted that. You know, I think about some of my own trauma that I've shared on other things I won't go into now, but one of the things about trauma is there are parts of it that inform you in a different way that allows you to turn up differently for things that kind of that creates that kind of connection. Because whether it's a case of feeling I will not have another go through that, and especially for me, it was about recognizing the huge damage done when another wishes to exert control, regardless of how they do it. Actually, I think it's important. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. As I say, so
that's okay.
Let's think about. There's a lot that we want to discuss together about disability. We're gonna, before we start, I think, let's think about labels. We were talking about this before, and talk us through that a little bit about the words we should be thinking about using, or whether it doesn't really matter too much about the words that we're using even. I think I'd be interested for you to kind of start us off on that point.
Okay, cool. So labels for me are a big thing because I've always struggled with pain since being a child, but because of my mental health, the focus was always on my mental health, and I was like one of the youngest people to ever be put on antidepressants and that kind of thing, and I thought pain was normal, and I didn't really understand it. And then it was only after the kennels and my body kind of shut down that then they started to do investigations and take it seriously. So when they said, like, you need to go for all these tests, and I was put through loads and loads of very, very invasive tests, and then saying, we think you've got this, which will be an awful disease. Oh, no, you don't have that. We're going to have to do another test, and it might be this. And having lots and lots of cancer scares as well, like it could be cancer or it could be something just as bad. Getting put through all of this, and then they eventually, I think they got fed up, downgraded it, and said that it's fibromyalgia. So from that, and I was like, right, I can deal with that. And then the next thing they said, oh no, you've got arthritis. So I was like, okay, I can deal with that. And then I got seriously injured working with a dog. So dog didn't attack me or anything horrible like that. It was just an accident. Got the dog on a long line. The guardian threw the ball too far. And then bang, my body just crumpled onto the sand, which was like concrete. So was actually supposed to be hosting Ruby Welsford this weekend. So I was like, said to my friend, I absolutely can't go to hospital. Ruby's arriving any minute. And she was like, no, we're going to hospital. So went to hospital, and the doctor couldn't believe the amount of pain that I must have been in. So then it began with the walking aid and then saying you may actually need a wheelchair because your body just isn't right. And automatically I detested the word disabled, absolutely hated it with a passion, because disabled had such negative connotations and overtones. And for me, from my trauma in the past, the word disabled opened you up for abuse, because again, with working in the care home, working with individuals that were disabled, I had seen it and I'd had to whistle blow and I had to tell CQC and safeguarding things. The disabled for me was a very, very negative label. And I don't think it's helpful, because when you speak to people about care homes who don't work in care homes or any idea what it's like being in a care home, horrible things are said, derogatory things like, oh, so you just wipe bums all day. Absolutely not. We deal with absolute legends who have their own identity and are these amazing, intelligent people. So from that, the term disabled really put me off, because you say disabled and you're lumping an entire community and forgetting every individual within that community. So people say, oh, well, you're differently abled and you've got superpowers and this kind of stuff. I was like, now I'm being spoken to like I'm a child, and this is really patronizing. So I don't think there is a label that any of us are going to settle on and be okay with. So since I have become more disabled and I'm in a wheelchair and it's got even worse, I have come to terms with the word disabled, and I do prefer the word disabled now. So in these years, I've completely changed my own feeling towards it, because I don't want to be called differently abled. And I don't definitely want to say that I've got superpowers, that kind of thing. So I think that's really pedantic. Ugh, no, just hate it. It makes my skin crawl. And this is the really important thing to understand, that some people may get angry at the label disabled, or they may get angry because of the label saying individual with disabilities. But there's lots of labels like learning difficulties, which I have, and intellectual disabilities that I just think are yucky, horrible words, because it shuts down that person's identity again. Automatically, there is an assumption that somebody doesn't have any intelligence. So when I did disclose that I was got dyslexia at the care home, human resources had to make sure that somebody from the human resource team sat with me to be a scribe and made sure I understood what was being said. Bearing in mind this is verbal, so someone's talking at you like a lecture, and then you're just making notes. And I just felt so stupid having somebody sat next to me and like having a big LED sign above your head saying, oh, this person has special needs and got learning difficulties, so they're really stupid. And it's not that at all. So I was late diagnosed for everything because of my situation as a child. So I was diagnosed with dyslexia at 17 years old. So the most awkward time in your life, and you're trying to find your identity as it is. And the next thing, you've got a learning disability teacher with you in your classes. And then you're going to have to attend special meetings and this kind of thing. And then everything that is done for you is done separately. So you're segregated from your supposed peers at the time. So to me, labels are actually really harmful, and it should be that this is your identity and this is who you are, and you're acknowledged as a person, because the label doesn't matter, and the label is just to overshadow and lump people together. And a great example of this, and I know everyone rolls their eyes and is sick of hearing about it, but for the disabled community, the COVID pandemic hasn't finished. It's still very alive for us, because there are still lawsuits going on. There are illegal DNRs that were put in place, and 59% of all of the deaths through COVID in the UK alone was a disabled community. And the government massively screwed up, because they said anybody who is disabled is not entitled to a DNR. But what they didn't point out was that they was actually referring to chronic illnesses where there's a life expectancy less than 6 months. They didn't pass this information on to GPs or hospital specialists. They said the disabled community. So if you have Down syndrome, fibromyalgia, arthritis, if you're visually impaired or you're deaf, you was lumped into the disabled community. So straight away, there was a lot of barriers, and people with hearing impairments or visual impairments found that they couldn't book a slot with a supermarket to have their food delivered to home because they weren't classed as being chronically vulnerable. So the people that had to stay at home because of being extremely vulnerable, they were then missing out. So the 6 foot distance thing didn't apply in supermarkets for them because they can't see. They have to try and find food by themselves. They had carers coming in that would possibly cross-contaminate. And this is how so many disabled people got sick as well. So I think labels are incredibly harmful. And if anyone says no, they're not, just go and look at all of the reports that are still ongoing for disabled people from the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, powerful. That's pretty important. I think this is the problem they say about homogenizing groups of society when it's actually very multifactorial and experience wise. And I think what I'm hearing you saying there actually then is one thing that's important is for us all to move away from thinking about that kind of label and what comes with it, and thinking more about how we are become more aware of the individual and their lived experience, whatever that might be, actually.
Absolutely.
It is hard to navigate, I think, sometimes, because even putting together the post to celebrate Disability Pride Month, and of course that word's in there, and you've just explained your own journey through that word. Having done some research myself and speaking to kind of friends of Kieran's and I's, how much of the community has taken on that disabled to be about being disabled by society. That's the problem, not being lesser able than. And I think that's, but also I know I've got friends who, especially in sort of neurodivergent colleagues and friends, who really hate that term big time, like you say. So I think it's difficult, and the problem is the labeling, and I guess that's what this shift is starting to see, because especially, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago plus, labels were very mandatory and very arbitrary.
Absolutely.
And I think those within that community that had almost had that stamped on them just accepted that this is my lot, without thinking that actually it was a societal problem, not them being the problem. And I think that's the thing that's being addressed now a little bit over time. So what's your experience then yourself, if we start on this notion then, as an individual, your own lived experience with the challenges you have? And I think it's really important to recognize that many people have different types of challenges. I think, but the problem is it creates a them and us with these labels, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And especially we'll come on to kind of individual, sort of invisible kind of challenges in a bit. But I think what's your own experience then when we think about you from a work point of view, you know, coming through, doing your training, what kind of barriers did you find there? What things did you have to overcome during this time? And what things do you still have to battle with now, you know, to overcome?
So before COVID hit, I was kind of ignoring the fact that I had this really, really bad disability that was disabling me. And I would be stood in the kitchen at the end of a workday crying because I was in so much pain and I couldn't stand, I couldn't sit, I couldn't lie down, I couldn't do anything with my body to subdue the pain. But I kept on going because I was too much of a people pleaser, and I was so determined to help everybody and to people please everyone and make sure everyone was happy, because we get that a lot in the dog training industry, where we are bothered about reviews and we do deal with people who get frustrated and then they aren't getting what they want straight away, so then they'll damage your business and put up a bad review. And I was so focused on that, again because of my mental health trouble, so I was dictated to by that as well. Then when COVID hit, I was like, well, this is cool because I already use Skype to help clients anyway that are further away, so Cornwall, Scotland, and that kind of thing. So I was absolutely fine with that. And then as COVID kept continuing and my disability was getting worse and worse and worse, it was getting more and more difficult. And I was met with clients who didn't want to work online, that was getting abusive, that were annoyed. And then as soon as the lockdown was lifted, getting straight back out to work, working 7 days a week, very long days to try and fit everyone in and try and people please. And my body was just screaming out saying, this has got to stop. And it's getting out of control. And people were not understanding about this at all. And then through the pandemic, I was diagnosed with another condition, with cyclical vomiting syndrome. So I'll be sick from 1 day to 5 days, no control, no warning that it was happening. And then that put more pressure onto me, that people thought I was a flake or a letdown, because if it's say an hour before doing a webinar, I could then start being sick. And because it's such a violent condition, you absolutely can't stop it. You can't just have toast and feel better. It's just something that your body has to do. So then I felt more alienated through that. Then in between, I think it was like the second or third lockdown at this point, I can't even really remember. But it got to a point where I was in a wheelchair and I could barely move. My legs just wouldn't work. I was having falls all of the time, and I had to accept that I needed to be in a wheelchair full time, and that this wasn't going away, and this was in fact taking over my life. So when everybody was returning back to normal, I was left behind because I had to stay online working with people and dealing with inquiries all the time saying, why won't you do in person? Why won't you do classes? I'm not going to learn from online. And I still get it now. So even though the pandemic is over, people still give me a hard time with inquiries now. So whenever there's an inquiry, I'm filled with dread, because even though it's wrote on the website, it's going to be via Zoom. I only work virtually now. Classes are virtual. They bypass it all, and then they still have to give you a hard time via the inquiry form. So then it causes this anxiety and fear sort of working. And you kind of see that colleagues are doing what you used to do, and like they're going from strength to strength, and you just kind of feel left behind. And it's not just me, it's the same for quite a few other people who are disabled, that they've been left behind as well, and we face different challenges. So
And did you explain to some of those people about why you weren't able to do some certain things?
oh, absolutely, yeah.
And what did you get? A mixed bag there? Some people, I totally get it. Or did you get some people say, well, I get that, but this isn't very professional, this isn't what I expected, and all that kind of thing?
More of the latter.
Really?
More of the latter, yeah.
Well, okay.
So it explains to people in wheelchairs, I can't possibly get into your house, like I don't even have transport. And it says, well, why can't we come to you? Well, because it's not where your dog lives, so that wouldn't be ethical, because you need to work in your own area. This is why board and trains don't work, because your dog isn't in your area, it's a false environment. And also there isn't an area suitable where I can say I can keep you safe in my area. And not just that, it's the pain as well. So people are forcing you to divulge symptoms, explaining why you can't be sat in a wheelchair for more than an hour, sort of thing. And even like with working online, the house minute, the minute just isn't suitable, and that's like another horror story in itself. But because of the pain, I have to sit on the sofa, and I've got like a special backrest for it. And people go, oh, you must be really comfy. No, I'm really not. I'm like in loads of agony. But I won't give up. I refuse to give up on dogs. I refuse to give up on helping people. And it's still what I live for. So people have to understand that even though you've become disabled, doesn't mean you don't want to work, because we absolutely do want to work. Stephen Hawking is a fantastic example of this, because he really struggled with becoming disabled, and he was suicidal because of it. And he thought his wife didn't want him, and he didn't feel that he was a good enough father. And the whole dynamics of everything changing and breaking down for Stephen Hawking, and Stephen Hawking talking about this as well, and the struggles that he had. And I think this is what people don't understand, is that if you become disabled, you're just a benefit scrounger. Because
Mm,
I literally think I was chucked into the disabled community feet first, and it was literally just drowning because of ableist comments, ableist attitudes, thinking you can't bother to go to work, you don't care, and all of these things being thrown at you that just absolutely aren't the truth. And that segregates you straight away. But yeah, mostly it comes down to people's attitudes, both professional and obviously guardians as well.
So do you think the dog community of professionals does enough to recognize those challenges and offer extra professional kind of pastoral care on that? Do you think more needs to be done?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I know I'm very quiet on Facebook, especially since becoming disabled. I say a lot less, and I just kind of lurk. And then I need quite a few days where I have a big break from social media, and that's mostly because I don't know if it's how the algorithm is set, but I seem to see all of the ableist comments from professionals. So there may be groups where it's just for professionals and there's no guardians, and seeing comments like disabled people shouldn't have dogs because they're lazy and they have a certain attitude and they expect everything to be done for them. So you're seeing, again, individuality is taken away and the community is labelled, and then suddenly disabled people shouldn't have dogs. And I'm seeing this from professionals and then having to fight professionals. And there have been disgusting things said about disabled people, and people aren't mindful that your colleagues are actually disabled. And I know of people with invisible disabilities at professionals who haven't disclosed it publicly, and is kind of like having to come out in a way. So people see, oh yeah, you're disabled because you're in a wheelchair, but they don't know everything that's going on with me. And you do kind of end up guarding it because of the attitudes that you see. And when you've seen someone write something so horrible, you're like, am I hella's like sharing that I have X, Y, Z? And another great example was when the shock collar draft came out. That was an horrific weekend. I thought after the pandemic, everything had started to finally start calming down a bit. We accepted that some people now are just horrible for whatever reason, because people have changed. And I've spoken to lots of different people about this, not just disabled people, but people have changed for the worse since COVID, as a generalization. And with the shock collar draft, somebody said on a public page, oh, well, the draft is excluding the army and disabled people from using electric shock collars. So I said, hang on a minute, it doesn't mention anything about disabled people there. And this person didn't apologise, but got their friends involved to gang up on me. And then I reached out to the person of the page who owns the page and says, hey, this has happened. This absolutely isn't okay. And like when you've defended somebody in the past and then they won't defend you in return. And I was like, whoa, this is really alienating. So the shock collar draft has come out, and at a time when the force-free community should have been coming together and saying, hey, you know, there's a lot going on behind the scenes and we need to fight this to make sure it does go through, because we all know the UK government's a joke. No. The onus was on disabled people because of exceptions. The army doesn't use electric shock collars anymore. So Sally Smith has been very loud about that, because Sally comes from the military services, as do some of her other tutors. And straight away, the force-free community just ended up being really vile. So at a time when we're supposed to be happy and like, wow, finally, the government don't understand what it is that they're saying or what it is that they're banning. But hey, this is a win for us. No, I just saw absolute vitriol from our own community.
Yeah, and sadly, you know, I'd like to feel that the vast majority of our colleagues are not that, but they are what I call the quiet, silent majority, because we have an increasingly vocal core that just wants to, I don't know what they want really, Tasha. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned all that about the ableist comments and how they're looked at and how they're seen as just being, they're not even seen as being anything other than just a comment or an opinion.
Yeah.
When you think about how carefully people, rightly so, try and navigate comments and posts regarding sex, sexuality, and race. I think it's a real important thing that we need to flag up.
Yeah.
And especially those who have some elements of power. I think membership organizations need to really think about this, especially supporting their members when they're having trouble with either things online or a member of the public, to say this is actually integral as part of our code of ethics, actually supporting, you know, our practitioner and what they represent, you know, from
Absolutely.
from their kind of lived experience point of view. So you obviously, so that's your experience yourself working professionally and the things that you have to deal with, and things that you know, you have to kind of fight, because obviously there's an even bigger element of what you have to fight just with society more generally, of course, with that kind of ableistic look and view. And it's interesting you said about how many people with invisible disabilities just don't share about them, actually don't talk about them. And we talked about this off air, and it made me realize that, you know, I've spoken about my sexualized trauma, about my breakdown, all this kind of stuff, but I haven't really shared about my own you know, I've got psoriatic arthritis. I was telling you about that, and I got diagnosed with ME about 15 years ago, quite early on when people diagnosing these things, and I don't really talk about that. I just kind of get on with it, and I have things, and I do make it clear to my clients. I have to say that I have an autoimmune thing, but you know, I can manage those flare-ups because I'm not living with it all the time. This is the point I put it. But when it comes up, but even there, you know, I've had comments made to me about. I remember there was a situation going back along when the train strike was on. I was supposed to be getting a train somewhere to present, and they said, "Well, it's only about 3.5 hours away. 4 hours you could drive, couldn't you?" And that's the point. You know, these things aren't said with any malice. They're just from their point of view, it's not that far to drive.
Yeah.
But actually, for me, I was thinking, God, I've got to drive 3.5 hours. I've got to go and present, and then drive another 3.5 hours. So in the end, I said, well, so I had to go up and stay over the night before to give me that time to break it up. So I had to kind of advocate for myself a little bit there. But these are things that I think we just need to be mindful of, really. Just because I can do it doesn't mean you can do it, or necessarily mean you can't do it, period, but you might not be able to do it today.
Yeah, this is it exactly.
So how could we navigate that then? How could people think about how they frame things then, just from a communicative point of view?
People, like, I know it sounds like a cliche, but it really isn't. I get really frustrated with this. People need to be kinder. And I'm really sorry because I'm terrible with remembering things. Caroline Flack, who committed suicide, and everyone put up "be kind" on their profiles, and I was like, "You're horrible, and you're horrible, and you're," and literally going for a list of people that I know are very unkind people, but they were the ones putting this up on their profiles, and they were also racist, homophobic, and just generally horrible people. So I find myself deleting many people, and we do need to embrace this ideology of being kind, because you have no idea what is going on in somebody's life, whether somebody is very quiet on social media, whether somebody is very loud on social media. We don't always know what is happening with a person and what they are going through, and assumptions like you can just drive there and it's a 4-hour drive is very harmful, because you then, like, maybe I'm wrong, but you may have felt a people pleasing kind of situation here where the train's on strike, I need to be here to present, and if I don't, oh my God. And so all these things start going through your head, and you force yourself to do it, and then your body enters this kind of stage of forcing yourself to do it with the adrenaline. But on the other side, your body's also suffering because you absolutely shouldn't be doing this. And I think our industry is very pressurized. And I think people think that we just play with dogs all day, and they don't see the compassion fatigue that goes with it and the anxiety that comes with it. And many of the cases that we deal with is definitely the opposite of playing with dogs all day. And it doesn't matter how much compassion fatigue an individual goes through, it does not give anybody the right to be unkind to somebody else or make assumptions. Because we're doing the social inclusion team page, lots and lots of people reach out to me, and I would never disclose anything, as I always say to them in messages, because to me it's vital that they know that they're safe and nothing's going to be said and no names are going to be dropped. But the amount of people that I know of that are suffering in silence in our industry, and people just assume that they can crack on and do what it is that they do, to me is extremely harmful. And it does really come back to being more aware, being kinder. And if somebody says, this has happened, don't say, we'll jump in a car. Say, what can I do to help you? How can I meet your needs? Is there anything that I can do? Because like this week is Mental Health Awareness Week as well. And there's a lot of talk about emotional disattachment, where we're not attached because of emotions, we've had to become emotionally independent. And people do skits and they show examples of what happens through parenting when parents are removing that emotional comfort that you're supposed to have. But at the same time, professionals are doing this as well. When we speak to a colleague, whether we're all self-employed with our own businesses or not, we should feel safe and we should feel empowered by our colleagues. We absolutely shouldn't have to feel, right, great, now I've got to do this. I'm going to have to disclose all of my medical information just so that they understand. So we should be more of the mindset of, how can I help you without trying to poke or pick for an answer as to what it is that's going on in their life.
God, yeah, that's powerful, isn't it? I think when you were talking then, Tasha, I just kept thinking about lots of different scenarios and situations that I've seen play out, social media especially. And I think, be kind. My mother used to say there's no absolutes but kindness. And I think being kind doesn't mean condoning, doesn't mean whatever. It just means a level of emotional maturity, really, which is thinking, I don't necessarily agree with that. There's an important question we all have to ask is, do I feel safe or not?
Yeah.
And if we don't feel safe with a conversation, with a relationship, with a professional space, then we have the choice to either leave it, of course, or to think about what extra boundaries we might need to put in place to create more safety. If we think, actually, because it's where I work or because it's what I do, I can't just necessarily detach myself. We don't have to become this combative force that just throws a lot of kind of vitriol around, and that's what happens, I think, sometimes. And also, we don't have to feel that we're right by just proving others wrong all the time. And I think that's something we see. I see people challenging other colleagues on their business pages with content that's put out for the general public in that area, invariably, to see. And then they're being schooled by another professional. Who just wants to pick up on maybe some technical points that may or may not be right anyway. Without the other professional thinking, I'm really going to champion you for the fact that you're trying to make a difference and you're not stringing up dogs in the process. So I think we all need to recognize that, because we all have moments where we're less aware, Tasha. That's just the nature of it. And I think what you said earlier, I think there's two sides to this. I think one is to try and improve our awareness. That's what a lot of these conversations are for me, because growth comes from awareness. Awareness of our own experience, but also awareness of others.
Absolutely.
But also, I think those who, I said to you before we came on that I was with a client recently who presumed that I was with a woman and I had a wife. So when she sent me an email, I think I might have said in the session, this is great today, but because we'd already run over, I said, I'm going to go home because I want to pick the other half up. I think I said something like that, just something in passing. So she sent me an email with loads of wife and all this kind of stuff in it. I didn't get offended by that. I think this is the point. I didn't get offended by it. And I've had my husband, people will know who works in the hospice, and there are people who are in the hospice where he might say about his husband and they'll call me his partner, and he had somebody going back along, they said, I can't bring myself to call him your husband. Well, my husband's not going to get offended by that in that setting. It's like, okay, that's fine. That's up to you. If partner's better for you. And I think it's just showing some humility sometimes about some of these things, and recognizing that we've got to pick our battles, I think, rather than just making everything about a battle. So when we think about invisible disabilities, then specifically, I think, like you say, there's so much of what you said, which got my head spinning over, but I've seen it myself play out on social media. Something's happened, people pile in, And then that person has to say, look, this is actually, and has to give part of their life story, their personal details, to somehow placate the mob, because it does feel like a bit of a mob sometimes, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it is horrible, and it's really sad to see someone being put in that position. And I'm not trying to say I'm better than anyone else, because I'm absolutely not, but I have sent inboxes to people. Sometimes people I don't even know, saying, hey, you okay? And sometimes you won't get a response for weeks because it goes to message requests, and obviously we don't see them straight away. But sometimes just checking in on someone, saying, hey, are you okay? Because, you know, you see that mob mentality, and then thinking to yourself, since COVID, we know that everybody's struggling with mental health. Like, whether people want to admit it or not, there is a definite mental health crisis. And we don't know if somebody is seconds away from self-harming or attempting to commit suicide. And this isn't talked about enough in our industry either. And I shared a post on this saying, like, the vets have their movement, but what about dog trainers and behaviorists? Because I know of dog trainers that killed themselves. I know dog trainers that have tried to kill themselves. And people don't want to talk about it. Oh, it's too sad to talk about, and all of this kind of stuff. But when we talk about invisible disabilities, mental health also falls under disabilities that people just aren't aware of. And if somebody has anxiety, maybe, just maybe, doing one-to-ones in person is just too much. Maybe attending a lecture theatre is just too much. And people don't consider this, or think, well, just because that's not my normal. Because I went to the Canine Principles lecture when they did their whole weekend, and I was terrified. And luckily, Sally and the team obviously saw that I was in crippling anxiety, really struggling. They took me under their wing, and then I was okay for the rest of the weekend. But the first day there, I was in bits. I was really struggling. And people don't recognize that this is an invisible disability. It's not always about a mobility impairment. It can be about your mental health. Or we've got cognitive disabilities where people have had brain bleeds and that kind of thing. So sometimes people may come out with something that seems totally offensive, and it's not offensive at all, because they can't help it what it is that they're saying. And I think there has to be more education within our industry for the different categories of disabilities, rather than lumping it all together. And I think education providers have got a major duty of care as well, because one of them is just as guilty as everybody else for being non-inclusive since COVID came to an end and switched from doing virtual seminars to, like, in person in the middle of the country, which isn't accessible for lots and lots of people, still hiking prices up, and then people finding that actually they can't pay for membership anymore because they're not being included. So I think education providers have got a lot to answer for as well. And just because people were annoyed with COVID and the rules that were put in place, we have to accept that, you know, people have been affected on a much larger scale than just annoyance. There's a lot of trauma for people through the pandemic.
And I think if you imagine a lot of people who were just about getting by before COVID, they'd found strategies that work for them despite the barriers and blocks that society puts up with you. That gets it's like a sudden slamming of the brakes of that.
Yeah.
And that is hugely overwhelming then, because one of the things I think many would kind of connect to is the notion of getting into your own routine with things that work for you, things that you learn yourself through trial and error, because a lot of the time nobody else is going to tell you it. Nobody else is going to, you have to find it out yourself. So I totally hear you on that. And I think also even things that we have. So I spoke to somebody a little while ago who was going through the process, or to do the kind of APL process to become a clinical behaviorist, and just how hard it was for them with their own particular learning style to get through that comfortably. So again, somebody had decided that we're going to do it in this format. So now you're automatically blocking those where that format isn't going to be accessible for them.
Exactly.
And I think we think about inclusivity and diversity, which we talk about a lot. And I think we need to add accessibility to that. How accessible is this on many levels?
Absolutely.
Social, emotional, physical, mental, you know, because it can be very difficult and challenging, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to become a clinical behaviourist, I really struggled with this myself because of going through the ICP. I wasn't in a situation where I could attend a university, so I can't just go on and do a master's. And also, disabled people are the most like impoverished community, if you will. We can't afford to just stump up £10,000 to go back to university to have that title of clinical behaviourist. So our community again is being met with barriers because you can't help when you do become disabled as an adult, and it, like, their application process is ridiculous. And then saying, oh well, you've got level 6 of the ISCP, that doesn't fit into the businesses that we roll with, we won't get enough money for that, so nah, you can't do that. And then people say student loans. But when you do have dyslexia and learning difficulties, it's all well and good saying, oh, we'll just apply for a student loan and then just go through this route instead. And it all gets too overwhelming. And you're just met by brick wall after brick wall. And I gave up. And as you said with the APEL as well, or some of the other organisations that then say, because you're with them and you're assessed by them, you're a clinical behaviourist. And to me, that's wrong. And instead, now I'm looking at the Pet Professional Guild, because they have made it inclusive. And if you need help, they will give you a scribe. You can do your exam over the telephone or virtually if you need to. You're not expected to jump through hoops of fire just to be included and get a special badge at the end of it. Because that's what it's gotten to. And I know lots and lots of amazing professionals who are downgraded because of this snobbery. So like, you do your ISCP level 6. Yes, finally, I've done it. I've done all this hard work. It's paid off. I'm now a behaviourist. And then you have the others in the other organisations going, no, you're a behaviour consultant because we say so, because we're CABs. And that's another barrier as well, because there is a snobbery that goes with it. And because they haven't seen the learning process and they don't understand the learning process, they assume that we don't have learning skills. Whereas I did the level 4, 5, and 6 over 5 years. So I ate, lived and breathed dog behaviour, and that just won't get acknowledged. And I'm not the only person with disabilities who've been through this as well and have gone, you know what, I just give up because I can't be bothered with it anymore. It's undue stress, and then it causes you more physical harm because our bodies react to it.
And there's a bigger issue here as well, not bigger, but another issue, because that's a big issue. Looking at it more widely, so it's not just specific part of the sector, I think more widely we can see that the barriers are there towards kind of education and accreditations. And what that means then is when we have members of the public who have their own kind of disabilities, their own kind of challenges, who are the professionals who are going to really get that and have empathy with that and have strategies around that? Because a lot of those people who haven't had to deal with some of these things either may not want to take the case on, because they think, oh, when the hell am I going to go with that? You can't do it the way that I know it has to be done. So I'm the one creating the barrier now as a professional. I've had clients quite recently where I've had to really be connected to their experience. I've had to listen to them, and then I've had to really think outside the box and think about things and contact colleagues where I can bring in some of that information and try and have those things, not just say, well, you can't do it then. And interestingly, the one client I had last year, just before Christmas, she'd had 3 other professionals who'd all said, well, you can't do it because these are the physical mechanics of this and you can't do it. What a thing to hear, though. So actually we need that kind of inclusivity, that diversity and that accessibility, so we can have a broad spectrum of practitioners with a broad spectrum of backgrounds. I think that's really important. And we focus a lot on, we have focused a lot on, on race within recent kind of years within the community, and that's important. But it shouldn't be an either or for me. I think we need a wider, broader general awareness of what all the different kind of ways that we need to think about these things. And you're right, I think if you already have specific challenges early on, for whatever reason, so lack of access to good resources because they're unavailable to you because of the lack of accessibility, you're not going to be able to necessarily have the income to be able to access the kind of courses that will give you that things. You know, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody who's a trans trainer in America, and he was saying that he kind of wasted a good 10 years of his professional career because of the challenges for him within his own community about just trying to kind of make a living. So he had to take his education off YouTube and Mr. Milan off the telly because it's free.
Yeah.
And it's only because he met an amazing person within his own local community that was able to show him a different way.
Yeah.
And also, interestingly, about the problems he's had within an industry where there's elements of kind of masculinity that's quite toxic, actually.
Oh, yeah.
When you're transitioning to be a man, and now you are a man, where's your role models? Because a lot of them are not the best role models for guys. So it's just a really fascinating conversation for me. So the good thing is we can't necessarily think about the bigger picture, the wider picture with society on the higher level stuff, but we can make a difference within our own, which has a knock-on effect then, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because it's like if you said for this trans person, with what we're seeing in America at the minute is absolutely terrifying. And with the awful school shooting, I saw the most horrific posts from people that you wouldn't expect to come out with this stuff because of what community they represent with church. I'll just say that rather than going labeling, saying that they wanted to kill all trans people. And then we've seen all of this horrible stuff that's happening in Florida, which to me is just sick. It's disgusting. And again, another community is being sidelined. Like I announced to the world by Facebook that I was non-binary through COVID, and I decided that I was finally going to embrace my identity because that's who I feel that I am. And lots of people reached out to me then about their own stories. And then we're met with things like this where a person who identifies as transsexual did an awful thing because of their trauma, and it was an awful thing. It doesn't mean then you can then tar that entire community and say you want to kill all trans people because they're disgusting, horrible people. No, they're not. It's a case of not feeling that you're in the right body, or that the body that the government says that you have doesn't feel right for you. And I see transphobia at least a few times every single week. And it makes me sick because people should be safe regardless of what community it is that you belong to. Growing up, I saw this a lot with gay people because my best friend as a child, her parents were gay. There was a lesbian couple and we got bullied all the time and asked really horrible things as a child, like, did you see X and this kind of thing? And learning words that were never mentioned in the house. And these are the attitudes that we're still surrounded by. And some of the things that are said to trans people and non-binary people, if that was a cis person, that would be sexual harassment. Or it could even be classified as sexual assault with some of the things that are said. But because a person is trans or non-binary, or even in the gay community, then, oh, well, it's just a slur, isn't it? It's just a bit of homophobia. It doesn't really matter. And it does absolutely matter.
It does. And I think it comes back to, we're come to the hour, but this thing about being kind, I think it's recognizing that even if somebody's lived experience is different to yours, or even one that you might not understand, or you haven't grown enough yet to kind of to recognize that it's their experience, and that we don't have to be cruel. And I think even if you can't be kind, then just don't be cruel. I think this is the key. You can be neutral. And I think that's a good kind of message to finish on, really. I think, and it's been a really powerful conversation for me, Tasha, and I've learned a lot from talking today, and really thought about some of my own frailties in some of these areas. And this is the point: we have to have safe spaces to talk about stuff.
Absolutely.
I think that the problem can come also from those who others need to be more aware of, when they don't create a safe space for those discussions either. We should be allowed to get it wrong. We should be allowed to kind of say things in the wrong way, not in a hateful way, but just because we don't know better.
Exactly.
Like that lady who presumed had a wife, that she doesn't know any different. That's fine. And everything is an invitation. I think this is what we know when working with dogs and their owners, that you can't make somebody. I think if we turn to, and this is the flip side to this that we see online a little bit, is where some turn to trying to shame others into changing their views and their minds, and that's where it gets a bit dangerous, because we end up with polarization all the time.
Absolutely.
And I can't remember who it was. It was a philosopher that said individuals are great,
Yeah.
people are a nightmare.
Yeah, that's
And this
it.
is the problem with polarization. We become just masses of differences rather than recognizing what connects us.
Exactly. I mean, it's like, as for Guardians, as you mentioned as well, and the poor lady who was finding that people wouldn't work with her, refer on. Refer on. If you're not trans friendly, for example, refer on to a trans trainer. If you can't help somebody with disabilities due to your own mechanics, refer on to a professional with disabilities, because they can help. And it isn't enough to borrow a wheelchair or buy a wheelchair and then say, oh, I know what you're going through, because you don't. You can't experience the pain and the struggles. And if somebody gets stuck in a pothole, they can just get up and walk. But for the disabled guardian, they're stuck. What if they don't have the phone with them? Then they've got to wait around for somebody to hopefully come and help them. And this is important as well. Like, Force Free People Against Aversives, we absolutely don't need to use aversives to know that it hurts the dog. You don't need to use a wheelchair to then say, oh, I know exactly what you're going through. Because again, it's just really patronizing. But instead of these guardians being left to flail and then going through trainer after trainer after trainer, refer on to people who can help them. And it's like my YouTube that is solely built now for helping disabled guardians to train their dogs from a wheelchair, because I was finding more and more guardians coming to me who had been let down and weren't able to access training and had a lot of trauma from that. So there are professionals out there that are disabled that will happily take clients on. The same as there are trans professionals out there. So if you don't want to work with a trans person, simply refer them to someone who is trans. It is that simple. We don't need to work with everybody or have that power of, oh, well, I don't want to work with you, so you just can't train your dog. Because it's about the dog welfare and it's about the guardian's well-being at the end of the day. They both matter.
It does. And I think it's really important that I like what you said there about, just because you can get a wheelchair and have a feel for it doesn't give you the full experience. I guess it gives you an idea of some of the things. It's like some of these celebrities who go and sleep homeless for a night.
Yeah, exactly.
It gives them a flavor of it, but they do go home.
Exactly.
Psychologically, they're not having to live that experience truly. And I think it's always good to kind of look at these things about how can I experience things a little bit differently, but it never gives you a full idea of that. And I think referring on is very important. I think definitely if you feel that working with somebody requires a different skill set to you, I would say though, I think if somebody wasn't prepared to work with somebody because of their sexual orientation, their gender, their race, then you're in the wrong job really, because we are in their profession. And I think, I know my husband talks about this a lot, that, especially within his environment, nurses, parts of the nursing team who are hesitant to work to somebody because their beliefs and gay people or race or whatever, they're soon identified and removed or given better education, because you can't turn up and set those parameters. The general public might do. I had a lady going back a while actually who asked me if I would stop referring to my husband in front of her daughter. Now that's pretty harsh and it's pretty full on. But you know what? I thought, okay, fair enough then. I'm not here to kind of pay reverence to your whatever it is. I'm here to help your dog, and that's fine. I'll do it. But I had a choice then. I could have said, well, subject, and I'll leave then if you can't accept that. But I'm not there for them to think about that. We have to look at these things. So we have to decide then as a professional whether that's an environment we can carry on working on. And we had a discussion about it, and she was happy for me to support a dog. She just didn't like the term husband because of their kind of religious dogma, because they didn't recognize it. So these things come along, but I think definitely when we're working with the general public, we have to be as well aware as we can. Awareness starts with us. It has to
Absolutely.
be plus fast. Yeah. Well, this has been amazing, Tasha. What any final points you just want to kind of things as we wrap up? Anything you want to share, and then also let us know where people can find your amazing work for sure.
Okay. But yeah, I just do think, and I can't stress enough that people do need to be kind of more accepting. Because like even awareness weeks being changed to acceptance weeks, because it's not just about awareness, it's about acceptance. And if you can't do that, like, yes, I can delete as many ableist and transphobic people as I like from Facebook, but you're still working with dogs. And as you said, Andrew, they absolutely shouldn't be in our industry. And because we don't have a HR department at the top, we can't just eject them like we could from a solid workplace. So people have to be more accepting and then create safe spaces to have conversations with us and ask us, and don't worry about the language that you are using, because most of us just laugh it off and then we'll just say, you're not supposed to say that. Instead, try saying this. So there are those of us out there that will have a laugh about it, and we may even have what you guys might say is derogatory nicknames for ourselves and that kind of thing. But if you speak to us and just say, how would you like to be spoken to? What your preference is? You can't go wrong with that, because then you've recognized the autonomy of the individual and you've seen past the cluster of the community.
So just ask.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, cool. I love that. Just ask.
Yeah.
I love that. So where can we find your amazing work?
Okay, so I'm on Facebook on Miyagi's Dog Training and Behaviour Services. And then there's the Miyagi Dog Training Community Group. So everyone is safe in there. I don't care what community you have put yourselves in, what community you belong to, everybody's safe in there. We don't abide bullying, and you will be ejected for bullying. So it's a safe space, and you can share photos of your dogs, you can have a rant, you can ask for help, you can share your training videos. It's just a community where everybody's on the same page and everyone's equal. It's for professionals and guardians, so there's no somebody is better than somebody else. And it's mostly there to help people who lurk and need the confidence to come out and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. So then we can support people and bring them into the light. And then I'm on YouTube as well, which again is Miyagi's Dog Training on YouTube. So
well, I'm in your group, and I just love the warmth in that group and the community support that's in there. So what I'll do is I'll share those links in the chat here.
thank you.
One thing to ask you then, is that from Mr. Miyagi?
Yes, thank you. Finally, someone gets it. Yeah.
Cool, great. I love that. I love that. My God, who doesn't want to be in a space that is in kind of honor of Mr. Miyagi?
Yeah, it was again because the kennels, the boss and his friends used to call me Mr. Miyagi as a slur. So when I quit, I was like, I'm taking that, because if we think about his teachings, his equality, his belief system, the way that we train force free, yes, it is slow, but you get results and you've got that emotional wellness for the dog as well. So I totally took that and I was just like, screw you.
You know, it kind of, when we think about our whole chat then, Tasha, that philosophy of Mr. Miyagi, I know he's a kind of fictional character, but it sums up your whole approach, which is that we train, we build, we grow for defense if we need it. We don't start with attack.
Exactly.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, darling. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Next week, we've got 2 conversations in the group. We've got Deb Bauer on Monday supporting blind and deaf dogs. And we've got cooperation, not compliance, thinking about how we support our clients with Martha Priddle as well. That's on Wednesday, so we've got like a double bill next week. So thank you everybody for tuning in this evening. Some lovely comments in the group. Thank you again, Tasha. That's been amazing.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good evening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.